Minus here from Pantheon Plus, and today I wanted to put together a pretty heavily opinionated video on LAS, or for those unfamiliar with the abbreviation, Limited Action Set. Now this topic is a fiery one, and recently Chris Joppa Perkins even addressed fans directly about this topic in an interview with one of Pantheon community leaders, Bazgrim. You can catch his full interview on Pantheon.plus or directly on his YouTube page. As this is a very heavily opinionated video, make no mistake that I may ruffle some feathers, however I believe strongly in what I'm about to say. And this video is not aimed at anyone directly or made just to cause a fuss either. If there are any issues that I struggle to understand both sides of, it's those actively campaigning against LAS in favor of a system where you can have all your spells on your bars, or as it's often referred to as UAS or Unlimited Action Set. Before we begin, it is important to note that currently Pantheon will feature an 8-slot section of your hotbar in which you can use for action abilities, in which Joppa defined as abilities that will generate threat or hate when used. You will also have a 6-slot utility bar for spells which do not. This gives the user 14 different abilities to use in combat, whether directly impacting the action of the fight or creating a utility advantage. That said, let's stay focused in this video on the 8-slot action bar. Now in doing this, I want to talk about 3 key points or sort of statements that are made from the anti-LAS crowd, and my thoughts on them. I warn you that some of these points may overlap through a few statements that are being put out there, but I will try my best not to be repetitive during this video. So let's begin with the first. And this is the fact that people are saying that Limited Action Set actually limits choice, and in turn does not create meaningful choices as it suggests it will. I obviously highly disagree with this statement. To begin with, gear setup and stats from gear will enable some abilities to become stronger than others. It has been said that a class will have abilities affected by different base statistics. So when designing a loadout of abilities, for example, there will also be meaningful choice to how you complement the gear for the different loadouts, which will in fact prioritize and impact different selected spells. This is indeed meaningful choice. This means building different gear sets for different roles you may carry in a group, and I love this because a loadout of abilities matched with a gear set can create some interesting change to gameplay and viability of spells or abilities in general. This is something that isn't new, as you can see things like this which work very well in games like Diablo. Sure, it's an ARPG, but why can't it work in an MMO? Moving forward, even deeper, think about how your choices are lumped with your group's choices. This was one conveniently overlooked by the anti-LAS crowd, and we'll get into more detail about this later. But meaningful decisions are also based off of the group that you're in. We need to stop looking at it as an 8-ability action set and look at it as a combination of abilities through our group. In a full group, that's 48 action abilities, and that's the whole thing with Pantheon. And to quote Joppa, he said, "This is a group-centric game. If you don't have the answer, someone in your group will. And if they don't, well, death happens." So with 48 abilities, is it a game design issue if you die from an unexpected event? Or is it a player's skill in adjusting, and furthermore, the lack of group organization? So point number 2 I wanted to talk about is the saying that LAS will lead to dying when not prepared for an unexpected challenge, whereas having the full set of your abilities will keep you from dying. So let's look at that as well. So my whole question is not having a few abilities or having a limited action set what really causes death? I mean, let's look at most MMORPGs. We could list off a few things, such as tanks not holding aggro, a healer missing proper heals, standing somewhere you shouldn't or not paying attention to your environment, which at times could even pull more mobs onto the group, failed abilities like Fiend Death or Crowd Control, or DPS overdamaging and drawing aggro, disrupting the control of the fight. These are all things that cause you to die in an MMORPG, and none of these will be negated or maybe made worse by Limited Action Set. A tank should have tank abilities, a healer should have their proper heals, and you should always be aware of your environment. So does having a singular ability or not really matter? I mean, let's dig in, all while keeping this thought from Joppa in mind. He quoted, "When it comes to combat, the buzzword that continually came up was strategy or strategic. I want to carve this path of what I think carefully and consider carefully about what is going to happen or what could happen or what are the potentials. After reflecting on who I have around me, what is my group made of, and what are we about to engage in, what can we do to accentuate that? to bring that to the fore and develop a combat and gameplay experience that accentuates that element. That is the genesis of limiting the action set available to players. So let's do a tiny bit of role-playing here and think about a group in Pantheon. So let's imagine you have the following roles defined: a warrior tank, a cleric main healer, a shaman off healer and debuffer, a rogue DPS, a ranger, and an enchanter. Now, we're going to assume some things here, so bear with me, but you can assume that having an enchanter gives you the ability right off the bat to slow down the combat when faced with unexpected outcomes, such as dispositions, or maybe a patrolling NPC who gets too close and adds to a fight. The power of an enchanter relieves the group heavily of needing CC-style abilities in combat, heavily distributed through the rest of the group members. This means it may not be necessary for a rogue to take their CC abilities. Also, the cleric is free to fully load out on heal spells and drive a singular focus role, knowing that they'll have a backup from the shaman. What's important, as just stated, is what your role is to the group. That will depend on a lot of things, but most importantly, player skill and group composition. So perhaps the rogue has the strongest damage output in the group due to gear and experience, or player skill as we just stated. Perhaps this character decides not to go all out on action abilities and focus strictly on DPS and not CC, giving them the main role of damage dealer. At this point, we have a dedicated CC, a tank with some purposed control, a dedicated powerful healer, a backup healer who's taking a support role, a main DPS, and now a ranger who can fill in any remaining gaps needed. I fail to see with this setup how one ability from one of these classes could create failure for the group when properly set up. The bad example here would be, well, what if the enchanter didn't have mez? Well, then you need to find a different enchanter. So let's go further into what we've seen in Pantheon thus far. In most cases, pulling a pack of over 3 or 4 has been very dangerous, as individual mobs are very strong. So if we assume that packs of 3 or less are the common engagement, or even 4, if one of those mobs or even 2 of them have a disposition, CC should still be fairly simple. Dispositions simply change the strategy from simple standard fight of kill A then B to changing up and saying, hey, let's kill B because of this disposition, and we're going to have to work hard to keep A interrupted or CC'd while we focus down B. This should never cause a wipe due to one singular ability missing or even multiple from a single player's hotbar. So keeping with dispositions, the next thing often said is that the disposition system's intent and meaningful impact is lessened by LAS. If dispositions are hidden, LAS won't be viable, or that LAS is in conflict with the surprise dispositions present. So let's start by saying this viable distinction is usually coupled with a fear of dying when facing the unknown. The whole argument here actually confuses me, because a vast majority of Pantheon fans want a difficult game where death is meaningful. Challenging means that you're going to die. If you get caught with your pants down, you die, with or without LAS. If you're not prepared, you will die, again, without or with LAS. Blaming LAS seems like a lazy argument to me, and more so, fearing death, which just seems out of place in a game like Pantheon. I believe that people are using this argument and forget the pure value of CC classes. In Pantheon, bringing back the 6th member to the group and allowing pure CC classes enables the ability to, in a sticky situation as said before, slow things down. Imagine you run into a pack containing an Avenger disposition as an enemy, for example. But we've already talked about that earlier, right? You would just focus it down. I believe that dispositions are not so much affected by what spells you have, but how you approach them, as also stated earlier. And I think that there's a big difference between having a spell that makes a fight easier versus making it possible. I would argue that you could put a well-oiled group in any situation, and regardless of what spells they wish they had, they would be able to get through that content or challenge down because of the group setup that they achieved. So going on further and bringing a quote from Joppa to this, he said the following: in regards to LAS and dispositions, I think that I've seen that pushback, and I think it's assuming some things that I'm not so sure should be assumed. To think that because you didn't have an enrage a stripping ability, for example, in your loadout when you realize that a mob can enrage, does that mean that you're not capable with 5 other players of still circumventing and pulling this off? Isn't that the challenge? It's kind of the part of the whole thing, isn't it? What exactly are you able to pull off with what you have to work with? If you cannot think of a way to overcome that, then yeah, you might die, and that's okay. In the end, I'm sure my opinion will not convince everyone, but I hope at least a few people can step outside their box and just at least put some deeper thought into the root cause of the issues. LAS is not a root cause. It's just an easy target at the top of the weed to blame for a player's inability to make decisions and take responsibilities. Not having one or two skills shouldn't stop you from succeeding. Sure, your healer has no healing spells up, well that's going to cause some issues. But is that because of LAS or is something wrong with that healer? Remember, Pantheon is being designed from the ground up to complement this gameplay style. The game is based on the groups preparing and working as one. It's not just about the skills you have, but what about the sum of your team has at their disposal? How can you communicate? How do you adapt? And most of all, how will you endure the challenge the developers toss at you, even when you do feel at a disadvantage? That's what gaming is. And that's really what true MMORPGs were supposed to be. There was excitement in unseen danger around every corner. Who will win? You or the environment? I'll give you one more quote here from Joppa, and it's sort of in regards to everyone's concerns with LAS causing constraint. And he said, "I don't think it's constraining of the character that's new. A limited action set like we are doing, it's a different form of constraint in the character which allows us to, design-wise, make abilities more potent, to make a button press feel that much more significant. Because it's understood that you're making a significant decision to put this ability in your loadout versus other abilities you could use. It also opens the door to multiple of the same classes being viable at the same time. This means the role that I play is significantly different, for example, from another druid in the group." To me, this is a no-brainer. More meaningful abilities, more strategic decision, and reliance on group play to fill in the gaps outside your designed role. This sounds like the reason a lot of us got into Pantheon in the first place. And LAS is just another tool to further entrench us in the important core values they are looking to bring back to MMORPGs. So, to me, with a game being designed around this skill set, it means that everything we do will keep it in mind and be built to challenge us the way we want to be challenged. So yeah, I don't get it. I think LAS is the right way to go. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and until next time.